Welcome back to another episode of Practical Project Management Podcast. We're so excited you joined us for episode 2, and I looked forward to episode 2 for several days leading up to the recording. Fonda Logston is someone I've had the privilege to work with, and she's just amazing. And I know that you'll enjoy this episode listening to her experiences. She makes everything sound so relatable, and she's just a lovely person. Fonda Logston is a certified project management professional and an expert program and portfolio manager. Her experience includes government administration. Fonda has worked for the state of Oklahoma in a variety of positions for more than 20 years. Her degree is in business administration with a focus on computer science. So enjoy.
What's the use of knowing true north?
But I just wanted to ask you which way I ought to go.
You get so caught up in restoring the galaxy to its rightful state.
I understand you're trying. You may be trying too hard, or you're not trying hard enough.
Always with you, cannot be done.
Confront the problem, fight, win!
Whatever it is we look forward to.
It's gonna be a bumpy ride.
Practical Project Management Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, just a little backstory. Fonda is one of my favorite project managers of all time. We have some stories that we could talk about later where people think she and I have had such a wonderful, you and I've had such a great time, battling ideas in the past, working on projects, which I think you and I both enjoyed it, even though people around us thought we were fighting.
Absolutely. I think we both enjoyed the banter, and I think we enjoyed coming to the best conclusion.
Yes.
Differing ideas are great when you're really wanting to make something great. I mean, you want to hear all sides. And I think many times we would do that. But you're right. People around us were sometimes terrified that we might come to blows. But it never came to that because we always came with a solution that was probably better than either one of us actually would have thought by ourselves.
I absolutely believe that because I think both of us are very passionate about, having a good outcome, and you're never afraid to go to battle for an idea to have the right outcome. But anyway, without going into more of that, you and I never talked about your history. You told me a little bit once upon a time about your early days in technology. Can you tell me, how you decided to become a project manager?
So I started out, as a developer, a programmer, COBOL and SCOBOL for the Tandem. And I got exposed to project management probably in the mid to late 80s. I worked for a medical facility that started a PMO. And, project management really just became kind of popular starting the 80s, and it really wasn't that popular, but it was starting to at least be talked about. And there was a PMO, and I was what you would call a technical lead on a huge replacement project for that hospital facility, and worked with a project manager. And then from there, I later went to the state where I was called to lead a big project for food stamps, again on the technical side, not the business side, but the technical side. And that lasted till, I was in that role for about 4 years. And then in 2005, the CIO of the agency asked me to start a PMO for that large agency. So that's kind of how I got into that. That's how I got into project management to start with, and that was developing a project management office from scratch. But I think being in a technical lead and doing a lot of the project management, when you're leading a project, whether it's the technical side or the business side, I think you're kind of have a natural tendency to move right into project management.
I agree with you. I think that's how it came about for me. You know, I before I got into technology, before I became a programmer, once upon a time, I was a drama teacher. And
Well, that's a jump.
I know, isn't it? And but I think my natural, you know, theater production has a lot of the same type of training that you get as a project manager. You learn about lead time. You learn about critical path. You don't use those terms, but if, you know, starting out, if you don't book the theater right away, you know, you learn some of those concepts. And I think because I had all of that, and then I was on a software project, and I seemed to have an instinct for, you know, handing out the work or in what order the work should be done. So they kind of said, okay, you should be the project manager. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think there's some people that are just inherently good at doing those and putting the pieces together. I mean, not that just, I mean, I think anyone could be a project manager, but I think some people have just the talent and the passion and the drive for it.
boy, that's interesting that you say it, and the passion for it and the drive for it, because it's not easy, is it?
No, and I know that, you know, I was working with a professor at OU here the last couple years, because I was talking to him. I said, as I've worked with project managers and started many PMOs, I've had, it's like you have a good project manager, but what makes this a really rock star project manager? And I mean, we can train them on how to do task plans and how to do WBSs and how to compute everything and how to hold a meeting. But, you know, what is the differentiation between you're just a good project manager and you are an amazing project manager? And I don't know that there's any real research out there, but it would be interesting, because then once you know that, you can train for that if it's something that you can train. Or is it even something you can train? Is it something you have to hire for? And that's where I was getting. When I was trying to hire PMs, it's like, okay, they have all the tangible skills, but will they be one of my rock stars? And if it is, what are the interview questions I need to ask to be able to tell that?
Oh, that would be interesting. You know, in my company, I hire project managers, and I've been leaning towards the aptitude, the instinct to understand the management concepts, like to know how to know when you're in trouble, you know, how to know when some people, and how to care.
Yeah.
How to call me up, you know, how to call the boss and say, we've got a problem with this customer. You know, that this isn't going well, and how to know early warning signs and things like that, thinking that through our systems, I could train the other parts perhaps on the technical skills of project management. That's the way I'm leaning right now. But I like you, would be really interested in what they found. I don't know who they is, but what they might have found in, you know, what character qualities make a good project manager. I know, kind of looking at PMP, you know, there's character requirements of the certified project manager. I don't mean that. I think you and I are talking about maybe more, you know, those intangible, inherent things that person has already.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's, you know, the soft skills, if you want to call them that. I think it is somewhat soft skills, but I think it is also, you know, like you said, can I recognize when this is not going the way it should be going? I mean, because I see a lot of PMs, it's like they come after the fact. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh, now I have a mess. And it's like, okay, when did that start?
Yeah, can you tell me when the sweater first begins to unravel, so we could just stop right there?
Yeah.
And cut it off, rather than, yeah, you've waited till it has to all be reknit. Well, so now you went on to you establish an even larger project organization within the agency, right?
Yeah, so I implemented the PMO at one of the largest agencies in the state of Oklahoma. And then in 2011, it was actually probably 2010 that the state started consolidating all the IT departments in the state to one IT department. And so in 2011, the state CIO asked me to come over and start the PMO for the state. So I did that starting in 2011 until I retired in 2019. So for 8 years, developed the PMO for the state, where we had, I don't know, we would have anywhere from 200 to 250 active projects at any one time across all the state agencies, which are several hundred state agencies in the state, ranging from, small, we didn't even look at projects under like 150,000. That wasn't even on our radar. And then they would be, hundreds of millions of dollars many times the projects were. So yeah, so went from an agency to the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when the consolidation happened. And so you retired in 2019. And did I read that you were still kind of doing some consulting work, or?
I am now doing consulting work. From 2006 to 2011, I helped the Department of Human Services there at the state with their enterprise architecture office. And that's a whole nother topic. But so now I go in and I help agencies. I'm helping one particular agency document their business processes and streamlining those. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of training, doing some Lean Six Sigma modernization with them. And then they had a system. This, I think, happened because I just happened to be there, and they needed help. They had bought a system before I got there, but they were having issues getting it implemented. And so I have helped them roll out their system that they had purchased prior to me arriving in 2019. And we're almost done getting all the modules rolled out for that system. So yeah, I'm helping on the side on a part-time basis. I'm enjoying retirement, and so I only work 2 or 3 days a week helping them document business process. I'm really amazed at the number of facilities that I work with and talk to that they don't have documented business processes. So, and that's a real challenge. I think that's a challenge for training new staff. And I've had a lot of managers that I've worked with, once we've gone through and documented their processes, they've hired staff and they're able to have them, functioning and productive within a matter of a few weeks instead of months or years.
I see it a lot, in our engagements. We've been on several projects, and we push ahead, because of, well, me, my tenacity that we'll get it documented through the process, which is kind of a leap of faith for us as a vendor, to go in with really just verbal explanations and trying to ferret out everything else that's not documented. And I'm wondering why you think that's so prevalent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just because I find it so important, I find it amazing that people wouldn't do that. But fortunately, the director over the agency worked with me before, and I mean, I was literally almost walking into the retirement party when he called and said, "Oh my gosh, I need your help over here," because he had came from, where we were, that we had documented our processes, to a place that hadn't, and he knew that they needed that desperately. So I don't know why they don't. It's maybe it's relatively a new concept in relation to, the last 15, 20 years, because really IT is still in its infancy, even though it's all around us. When I started back in the 80s, it was key punch, and that's not that long ago. in the relation of, if you look at how long we've been creating cars on an assembly line for, a long, long time. And so IT is relatively new. And I think documenting business processes is even, more recent than that. So I don't know that it's just not adopted and prevalent out there.
Well, I would agree with that because I see that so very often. I want to take a different track because on your work as a project manager, obviously you're highly successful as a project manager and, creating a project management office, being asked to do that and the roles that you've had there. I want to flip the script a little bit and ask, have you ever been on the other side where you were a sponsor of a project and there was another project manager?
So throughout my career, I had a tendency to get departments that were needing a little help. So over the 8 years I was at the state office, I was put over the service desk for a period of like 8 months. They put me over facilities management for a while, and both of those, what I did was documented business processes. But in the time I was over the service desk, we also implemented a new service desk system, which I was not the project manager on. I was the sponsor for that project. And and that was a little challenging from someone that likes to, take control and, and do it my way. So, and so I may have been a little more hands-on than most sponsors would be, but it was a different perspective because I also had all my other duties that I was responsible for as a director, over multiple departments. So I couldn't give it the full attention that if I was a project manager I could have. So that was interesting. I was very involved. We would do stand-up meetings and I would show up for those. And I don't know that all project sponsors necessarily show up for their project stand-up meetings. And I also think because I understood it, I was able to, remove obstacles for the project manager a little bit better because I understood that was my role. My primary role was to remove obstacles. So we implemented that. It was a very smooth implementation and a very quick one, but I think, and part of that was probably, we had a very good project manager and then I understood what we needed to do. I understood scope and not changing it and all the things that you have to train sponsors on. I mean, I understood not to go change the scope on this project manager halfway through the project, like many times happens. So yeah,
Well,
it was a different experience.
I like that you said that about training project sponsors because, well, I have some theories, but we can talk about that later. I'm interested in what you think or what percentage of technology project sponsors, let's say in public programs, let's say on the government side, let's say they have a budget of at least 10,000, but I mean, you were on very, very large projects, but I kind of felt like at a minimum of 10,000, but let's even say 50,000, $100,000. How well prepared do you think project sponsors generally are for their role?
I think they are probably there's very few that are totally prepared to be a project sponsor. And I think primarily that is because most, especially your larger IT implementations, those are kind of like a once in a career type things that happens for a sponsor. So it's not like this is something they do this year and again next year and again next year. So it's not like they've been a sponsor 4, 5, 6 times. So I think part of it is because they're just not in that role very often. And I think that is part of it. And then some of it is it's just not talked about. I mean, I was very fortunate in the first PMO that I started that the director of that agency was very supportive of training. And he wanted people trained from the top to the bottom. So we did do a one-day sponsor training. So the sponsors at that agency, they got it. I mean, because they had been trained, formally trained. At the state, we struggled getting support to do a one-day or even a half-a-day training for sponsors. They were, you know, they're too busy. We can't ask them to, you know, commit that type of time. And so we never really was able to really train our sponsors formally. They was kind of like on-the-job training is what they got.
So but you would say that the formal training was effective then, or was more effective than the kind of as you go along project manager trying to train the project sponsor on what their role is?
Absolutely, because, you know, we had a third party come in and they outlined, you know, what the project manager's role is and then what is your role. What should you be looking for? What questions should you be asking? You know, because in reality, that PM does not work for the PMO. They work for that sponsor. And I don't know that all the sponsors understand that that person is speaking on your behalf and they're doing work on your behalf. And if this is successful, it's because you and that project manager have open communication and a good relationship to push that project forward. And I don't know that they all understand that. And I don't think they understand what their role is and what they should be expecting from that PM.
I would agree with that. I mean, that's been my experience. Can you share, do you have any stories of some of the worst project sponsorship behavior that you've ever seen? Just because stories are fun.
Yeah. So, so we had a project that because of timing, it was a very short time frame that we had to implement it. So we had agreed we were going to implement it. I think it was something like 23 sites. We were going to implement it in 23 sites. We had definitively established the scope, and it was a complete, I mean, it wasn't just the software, it was the hardware, the end devices. I mean, it was everything. So, you know, there's a lot of analysis and research because they were all across the state. We had to do bandwidth analysis. I mean, there was just a lot to getting a site prepared to even roll something out in that site. And she would constantly be wanting to add 2 or 3 more sites. And I don't think she realized the lead time. I mean, yeah, a site took a weekend to bring up, but we had spent months with different, you know, providers on to get the bandwidth that we needed at that. I mean, you might have to work with several different providers to do tests to see which one could provide the best bandwidth. I mean, so it would take months to get a site ready, and then she would just want to throw a site in. And so, which I think project managers probably complain about scope creep constantly. And that probably is one of the biggest things that can make a project fail or get the perception that this wasn't a successful project because it didn't get me everything I wanted, even though it got you everything that the project charter said you were going to get. It didn't get me everything I wanted. And so that was a challenge because not only would she want that, but then it was ugly when she didn't get what she wanted. And so that was a challenge. And we stuck with, you know me, so we stuck with the 23 sites and we finished that project. And then I always said there's always phase 2. We can add these on
Right.
later. And I'm not opposed to changing scope. I mean, you and I think, went through scope changes where we'd look at it and say, okay, adding this is not going to be that big a deal. It's another additional day. But when you look at something, it's like, no, this is an additional 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's different. And I think when a team and a sponsor can all sit down together, and it's kind of like, you've got a 3-prong. You've got your business side, your vendor side, and your IT side. And when those 3 can sit in a room and have a discussion and say, yeah, okay, we're going to do these 3 things, but we're not going to do these 2, and they all come out of the room in agreement, is ideal. And but that, I'm not opposed to scope changes. I'm just opposed to them when they jeopardize, money, time, quality, those.
The things you agreed to in your project charter, right?
Exactly.
So you brought up something that I wanted to explore with you. Have you ever had an experience, or in this experience, let's say you agree to change the scope, right? So all 3 players in the room said, gosh, I really hate to do this to the project, but for X reason, we're going to need to. So we're going to change, and you go through your change process and change control process, and you update everything, the schedule changes, the budget changes. And then, you finish out, you do everything, but after the fact, the sponsor or the stakeholders say, well, it went over budget and it went over time. Has that ever happened to you?
Well, I think when that's happened to me, we have not been diligent in documenting everything and making it clear that we're changing things. I've seen, in several experiences where actual change orders are just, a handshake or a verbal telephone call and not formalized and put through a process. So, that has happened, I think, when we don't formalize our decisions. But when we formalize those, I know we worked on a project where the project sponsor, she totally got the whole change order part. And she wouldn't approve anything unless she saw a change order in writing and the pros and cons and the costs, which I just wanted to hug her neck.
I bet.
Because, as much as it's like, well, dang it, I'm going to have to go back to my desk and create all this paperwork, but I love you at the same time. I think it's mostly when you don't communicate it and you don't get it in writing. Yeah, I've had sponsors that'll say it went over budget and it went over time, even though you're like, okay, we had this discussion on February 27th and you agreed to this. And yeah, that's frustrating.
Yeah, the reason I asked, because I wanted to know how prevalent it was. I've had it happen a couple different times where I actually had a documented change order, and I had things too that they brought up that were scope changes, and nope, we're going to stay with this because if we add all those things in, it's going to change the schedule, and you don't want to change the schedule. And even though all of that was documented after the fact, it's revising history to say, oh, well, we didn't get all the stuff we wanted. It's like,
yeah.
Wait a minute. You brought up a bunch of scope changes about 60 days before rollout. We told you what the impact would be. You decided you couldn't do it, but yet, the project failed because it didn't deliver those things you identified at the end and didn't want to pay for. So,
well, and I wonder if that's partly because they don't feel like they had the skin in the game. One of the things that I really admired at the agency I was at before I went to the state PMO was that director insisted when they would have governance meetings, he insisted the sponsors give the update to the project, not the project manager. And that really changed the dynamics in making them not only be aware of what was going on with the project and how it was going, but to actually take some ownership.
Yeah,
the
I think
project.
that's fabulous. That's wonderful idea.
Yeah, and I mean, your PM should not really be the one that knows as much about the project as you do. I mean, you should know as the sponsor. I mean, you may not know the little details of when this server is going to be configured, but as far as scope and challenges and budget and all that, you as the sponsor should know that as well or better than your PM.
I agree. You're preaching to the choir. This is why I wanted to have you on. So awesome, because yeah, I've seen that, and I think I have that same expectation, but I'm often disappointed. Have you ever had someone who, well, you were really great, and you just said there was a sponsor you had that would really hold your feet to the fire on documenting everything, every decision. And so I'm hoping, or was that project then comparatively very successful, or how would you rank that?
Yeah, I would say it was. I mean, not that we didn't have successful projects with, probably not as involved sponsors, but that one was, I think, very successful. And it was really much less stress on the PM. I mean, I don't think people realize the amount of stress some of the project managers are under, because they really have the whole world on their shoulders. The perception is that the whole world's on their shoulders to make sure this project makes or breaks, and I don't know that it really, I think a good sponsor helps shoulder some of that. And one of the things I did when I was a PM to a sponsor I had, and I had a weekly, of course we do our status reports to the whole team, and then I would give him a status report, and I said, okay, I'm going to put things on here and I'm going to mark them yellow, and I don't want you to react to them, because he was a fixer. It's like, okay, well, if I see it on there and I know who's causing that, I'm going to go fix this. And I'm like, I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to start getting the sense of my frustration. And so when I do come to you that it's a problem, I didn't want you to hear it for the first time. And I wanted them to see this has been building for weeks, this issue. And that, I think, was very helpful, because then when I did come, it wasn't like, well, what have you done? Well, let's go talk to so-and-so first. And, and then it's another 6 weeks before you actually address the issue, when I've already been dealing with it for 6 weeks. So one of the things, for a PM to make sure that they have a relationship with their sponsor where they can come to them and say, I'm frustrated. I don't need you to react to this. I just need you to share in this frustration today.
Oh, I think that would be terrific support for a project manager. And it makes me think too, especially in organizations, because I think you and I are talking from some similar experiences, where maybe the project manager didn't have strong authority, that their organization didn't give them direct control of the people, like on the teams, or the people that they worked with. How don't you think, or do you think, maybe you don't, that the authority of the project manager also indicates whether or not they really, really need that sponsor to take a strong leadership role?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the projects that I was kind of helping lead and push through, I was at a director level. So when I would walk back to the server guys or the network people, I mean, they would listen to me because I was, I was not a peer. I was more of authority, but if a PM had went back there, you would hope they would have listened to them, but that's not always the case. I mean, because PMs are kind of peers to those people, and they're kind of like, well, who are you to tell me what to do? you know, and and then I think sometimes it's how you go back, because I'd go back and said, I know we didn't plan this as well as we should have, and now I'm pulling in a favor here, please. But I do think, and the larger the project and the more team members, the the bigger that struggle is. So if you have like one department you're dealing with versus maybe this is an agency-wide project and you're dealing with, 5 different departments, and I mean, yeah, if you don't have authority to get done what you need to get done, you've got to rely on that sponsor to do that.
And I liked how you framed it, or like they could reframe it. And that's what I was going to ask you. What could project managers, what do the best project managers that don't have authority do day to day to get fussy technology people to cooperate?
Well, I mean, sometimes the fussy technical people are irritated because this same PM calls in favors all the time because they're not planning appropriately. Because I do see a lot of them are willing. It's like, okay, well, she never comes and asks me for a favor. She never comes and pulls the I messed up card, can you help me out here? So I'm going to do this. But when you have a PM that consistently does not plan well, doesn't involve them in the planning, then I think that's when they get, I mean, you're going to have some that are cantankerous just because they can be, but I think you will normally get cooperation if they know she's done everything she could have planned for and this just happened, and it happens to all of us. And it is kind of new for technologists. I know when I went to the state, when we started having team meetings and we're bringing everybody in to do WBSs, and Fonda shows up with her Sharpies and her Post-it notes.
Yes,
and
I love that exercise, by the way.
At first they are looking at me like, I'm like, well, get out of your chair. We're over here on the wall. We're going to figure this out. And then I'm asking them a million questions. And then, so what all do you have to do that? Do you need 2 weeks to do that? You need 2 months? And then at the end, when I publish it, they're all like, oh, yeah, this looks like a realistic schedule. I think we can do this. When they are part of the plan, I think you get less pushback. And I think so many PMs just go off and try to do it themselves and just go talk to a few people and put a plan together instead of getting everyone in the room and saying, we're not leaving until we have a plan up on the wall with these million Post-it notes.
That is, by the way, as soon as I saw that idea, I have taken that and I use it every single project. And it is one of the best exercises. In my experience, it has done exactly that. All the people that want to hang back and that you might have trouble pulling information out of them, now they're required to participate. And but on the other side, because they can't say that they didn't have a chance to tell you everything that it was going to take and how much time, how much effort. I love that activity, and I might put some description and about that later on the website because it's one of my absolute favorite. I'm glad you brought that up, and I learned that from you. So I love that exercise. And that's a great way of building your plan. So coming to the end of our session, I really want to thank you again for all of that, because I think you've added to, some thoughts about how can project managers, be a little bit more prepared, or how they can work with people that's, the cantankerous and the non-cantankerous call in favors. But I wanted to know if you have some tips. So you mentioned a formal training for project sponsors, and I don't mean to go into all of that, but what would you say your top tips for a new program director, knowing that they're going to, take on this. Let's say they got a grant for $2 million, so now it's not even just visible in the state, it's visible at the federal level. What are some tips you have for them that in the project sponsorship role?
So, I mean, one thing is to stay involved with the project. And if that means you meet with that project manager every week or you come to some project meetings, I would do that, stay involved. I would insist on seeing some of the documentation, and that means status reports, the project plan, those type of things. Because sometimes you're like, they exist, but you never see them. And so, I think that it's important that they see them and they understand what the plans mean. I would say don't overreact, but don't underreact. And that kind of goes to keeping your PM, involved and transparent with you. Let them be able to come to you with problems that they're ready for you to solve and problems that they're not quite ready for you to solve. So building that relationship with that PM, I think, is very important, and making sure that both of you are on the same page.
Awesome. And I want to circle that one again about the reading the project plan, reading the status report, reading the schedule, because it's sometimes, in my experience, they're produced but never read.
Yeah. Or
And
they're
so-
never even, as a PM, you don't even schedule a meeting to go over them and say, okay, we're going to go over this one last time to make sure we haven't missed anything. And I don't even see that happening. It's like, okay, I had the meeting, I created it, I sent it out, and I assumed everybody read it. Well, no one has time for that. No one has time unless you schedule a meeting and go over it and discuss it in detail. And that means with your sponsor. If that means you have to schedule a plan review with your sponsor for that purpose, then that's what you need to do. I don't think you can assume just because I emailed the document out that it got read. You probably need to assume it didn't get read.
These days, especially with, because your sponsor is going to have 350, 400 emails in a day.
Exactly. Yeah.
So assume it didn't get read and take the time to review it with the sponsor. That's a really great tip for project managers to take the extra step to keep your sponsor in the loop.
Yeah.
Not just send it out.
Right. And I think a PM needs to be, they need to be aware of how busy that sponsor is, because I would do status reports and I would put things they needed to know in red, things that I wanted them to be aware of in yellow, and everything else, read it when you had time, or we'll discuss it later, it's not important. Because they don't have time to read even a one-page detailed document. So it's incumbent upon that PM, if you want that sponsor to know something, you better put it in big bold letters and red and make sure that they get their attention. And I would even pull the significant things out of the document that was attached and put it embedded in the email.
That is so awesome. I've bolded some things, but I may start highlighting now based on your encouragement. Well, that is a great tip. Fonda, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you'll come back and visit us in the future with some other topics related to, maybe we'll talk about your sticky note Sharpie activity sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it, and even though I'm not directly in the profession anymore, I still find I do project management constantly in everyday life or with my Girl Scouts or whenever I get the opportunity. I don't think you ever leave it.
I agree. Yeah, and someone as passionate as you, I imagine, good ideas. Oh, yeah, and I didn't even mention your work with the Girl Scouts, which super
I'm super impressed with all you do and somewhat jealous about the retirement, but I'm not there yet.
It will happen sooner than you think. So and you will love it once you get there.
I have no doubt. Well, I wanted to say thank you again, and we'll go to work. I'm going to go ahead and stop this.